The Virgin Suicides. Nostalgic poetry found in a teenager's room, making the tragedy and absurdity of life a little beautiful. Okay, here we have The Virgin Suicides. It is a drama, family drama, tragedy, slice of life, coming of age type film. It is a film adaptation of a book by the same name, written by Jeffrey Eugenides. We're going to get into way more details with that. I did a review on the book already, and the movie has helped me appreciate and understand the book so much more. So this review is going to be a little more broad than just the movie, although I am sticking to just rating the movie by itself, but also in comparison to the book because of the adaptation stuff. So, original source material, Jeffrey Eugenides, who wrote the book. Sofia Coppola wrote and directed the film. We've got a lot of people starring in here, but namely Kirsten Dunst, James Woods, Josh Hartnett, Kathleen Turner, and it came out in 1999. There will be spoilers, but not yet. So, first thing I want to tell you, if you're a reader, read the book. Read the book 100%. I would suggest, what worked for me was reading the book first. I actually read the book alone, and then a few months later, my partner and I read it together, just like reading out loud to each other, mostly her reading to me, fortunately for me. So I got to experience it that way, and then we watched the movie like a couple days after we finished the book together. So I would say, firstly, if you are a reader, read the book. I think that the movie is supplemental and can, at least for me, I find that I get, because there's this visual element and you're processing some of that source material through another filter as well. It's interesting because I can go back to that source material, what I was thinking and feeling sometimes if it was soon enough, and then looking at what the director had done, or the writers, or both in this case, it's the same person, the choices that they made, and it helps me understand the book sometimes better. Sometimes, it does that no matter what. If it's bang on with the book, or if they've consciously made some very different choices, or, in this case, some foreshadowing, where it is straying from the book, but maybe not super consciously, maybe consciously. I'll give you some adjectives here for the movie. But this is where it gets tricky. Okay, it's beautiful, tragic, dramatic, casual, simple, underdeveloped, soft, poetic, amateurish, nostalgic, subdued. So I say it gets tricky because the story is a lot of these more positive things. The story is beautiful. The story is poetic, right? It's dramatic. How it was treated and represented here through film, that's where we get some of these other things coming in. Simple, underdeveloped, subdued, amateurish. And I'll get into those details, but again, I'll give you a proper rating at the end as well. Before we get into spoilers, though, here's the thing. I think that there's a possibility I'd watch the movie again. And I'm going to just say that right now, that I think it is worth a watch. If you are not a reader at all, the movie has some of that story and that beauty from the original piece. But again, if you're a reader, I would read the book. I would do both as a reader. The movie's not a lot of investment. The book isn't even that long, but it's a wonderful journey. Anyway, so summary, if you don't know anything about The Virgin Suicides, no spoilers in the summary here. Basically, we've got a group of teen boys observing this family from afar, sometimes like from right across the street. They often refer to them as the Lisbon girls because there's 5 daughters in this family, no sons. Mom and dad are there. And they just get closer to the family and closer as things progress. And they want to get closer because they're fascinated by these girls that live in their community, just across the street from one of them. So it's also a story, I would say, about parental neglect. And also just, I mentioned the absurdity of life in that beginning segment. Nostalgic poetry found in a teenager's room, making the tragedy and absurdity of life beautiful. And I think that one of the things that this film does well is express puberty, and that the pain of puberty and the tragedy and absurdity of it. It doesn't do that with much humor, unlike the book, but it still does it effectively, especially the absurdity part. And part of this is done through the role and lack of role of the parents here. So it is a family drama, but it is lighter, which is kind of odd to say when we get into spoilers or if you know the key elements of the story, to say that it's lighter, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I'm going to go back into spoilers after I get through this, and I got a lot of notes, and there's a lot of good things that the movie does. There are. But anyway, target audience, I would say if you're into a soft drama with some beauty, it definitely has this really nice nostalgic feel. It is this coming-of-age tale, so if you're into that, it definitely is a different take, because as a coming-of-age tale or like a slice of life, it's not focused on one individual. It's focused on the observation of a family, and then how sometimes these kids watching get in the mix a little bit, but mostly it's observational. And the people, the narrator basically, or the narrators, or those that are speaking, we don't know much about them at all. So it is a little bit of a different take on like a coming of age story, because it's not, again, about just the person speaking or the perspective of the person. We don't learn about their coming of age that much, except through the lens of how they see others, which is important. Speaking about importance, what is the function of the film, or is it important? I would say that it is important in studying how to fumble a book-to-movie adaptation. I would say that as a standalone film without the context of the original piece, it lands on the middle of my it's on the middle of my shelf. I think that it is a beautiful story. You wouldn't know it if you didn't read the book. You wouldn't know how much poetry should be there, because this adaptation lacks a lot of it. And when I say poetry, I don't just mean like literal poetry or poetic verse or the way that the narration is, but just the elements in the story, the beauty of how things play out and why. The symbolism, the metaphors, the motifs, and the stark contrasts, those things are pretty mild here in comparison with the book. So I think that, again, how this is on the middle of my shelf, it's fun. I guess if I didn't read the book, I wouldn't have as much to compare it to, right? So I wouldn't know what's missing. But I don't think I would understand it as much either, because I think it's a subdued film. It doesn't achieve all that it could. And reading the book helped me understand how it could be better, which is by following more of what the book has in it. I think that Sofia Coppola took something incredibly beautiful, the original story by Jeffrey Eugenides, and didn't make it her own. Rather, she dumbed it down and simplified things and pulled a lot of punches and took a lot of the high contrast moments out, which effectively cut out the poetry and the beauty of this work. That's why it's on the middle of my shelf. I don't think it's a horrible movie. I just think that again, it falls into that middle ground of like, you could take source material and go and make it your own and really try to do something different with it. Great. Or you could do something like Fight Club, which is almost like word for word. And it's amazing and so good. And the way the choices they made for visuals and representation, things that aren't in the book, that aren't said in the book, it just brought it to me. That movie brings the book to life even more. I had watched the movie so many times before the book, though, that when I did read the book, all I could do was just hear Edward Norton in my head, right? I could just see Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, and just like, it was incredibly well done. It was like, hey, we love this book. We don't really want to mess with it. It's great. Let's make this for film. I think we could do some amazing things visually and tell this story through film. And they did amazing. This did not do that. It's like she was trying to take the book, and I'm not her, and I don't know all her intentions, but she didn't make it her own except by turning the sound down on the whole thing. And I don't know if that was intentional or not. Trying to make it more palatable and pulling punches and muting the color of this thing. I don't know how intentional that was or what the purpose was, because it's the choices that were made are obvious because they do those things. They mute everything, but they mute the good. Like, it's not like, oh, we just took out this one scene because it wouldn't, like, we'll get into those details in a second with the spoilers. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's where that's at. Middle of my shelf. Beautiful source material, but the film just didn't take it to that next level. It's mediocre. And it is amateurish. Like, the writing and directing of it together, of taking this beautiful work and fumbling it. So that's where that is. Now I want to get into spoilers. So spoilers are here, people. I think that in some ways this is going to be a better review of the book than the book review was, by the way. But anyway, just because I understand things better now. So, okay. To get into, I'll give you a better summary now with some details. Basically, it's funny that it's called The Virgin Suicides. Not funny. It's interesting that it's called The Virgin Suicides, because we know for sure that out of these 5 girls, all of them who have commit suicide, just to throw that out there, one of them is 100% not a virgin. 100%. The others, we assume, are virgins, but we don't know. Basically, the book and film focuses a lot on just 2 of those 5 girls, and one of them that was the first suicide, and the other one who we know is not a virgin. But basically, we have this really strict, tight household, and the girls are just I feel like they are neglected in a certain way, because the only love they're getting is through power and control, and not letting them exit the nest and do things that they need to do to develop and grow as people. So we have one girl who tries to commit suicide and fails. The first one, Cecilia, which we'll talk about a lot. And then she does effectively commit suicide by jumping out a window and impaling herself on a spiked fence. We're going to come back to that detail. After that, then we have the rest of that happens very early on, and then we have the rest of the story. We get to learn about the family. We get to learn about Cecilia, who's now dead. We get to learn about the rest of how the family works, and especially about Lux. And through puberty and romance and observation and interviews with people as well. So eventually, all the girls go and try to commit suicide again. And in the book, here's the key difference. In the book, one of the girls still couldn't quite do it. So then there were 3 that were dead, and then they had the one in the hospital, and then she comes back home, and then shortly after that, she kills herself. And I feel like, and in the film, it's not that way. In the film, towards the end, all the rest of the girls commit suicide successfully. And I want to go back to that key difference, but that's what happens. So basically, that is a summary of the story. And we'll get into details in a bit here. So one of the things that when I mentioned that Sofia Coppola pulled punches, and I don't know why. Sometimes I mean, choices are made, and some of it's for time, but the things that she didn't include here were so important to the story and enriched the story that I don't know why she did it. So one thing here that I'm confused about is in the book we have a character that isn't, he's not a main character, he's not present very often, but I'm just gonna, his name is Joe, and the kids call him Joe the R word. I don't want to say the R word, but they call him Joe the R word, and he is depicted in the movie as a gentleman with Down syndrome. So he is there, he's in the movie, but in the book, the spirit of this is like these kids are making fun of him, and I mean, we're set in like what, the, oh man, I don't even know, what are we set in, 70s, 60s to 70s. It's got to be 70s. I don't know why I didn't think of that before, what years this is really set in. But anyway, I mean, these kids are like making fun of him or whatever, not like being physically abusive, but he's got like little quirks and things. And in the story in the book, they call him Joe the R word, and like they're a little more malicious. And in the movie, this is one of those things you could have just left him right out, because he doesn't serve that much of a purpose the way that his character interacts with others in the movie. In the movie, they interact with him in almost an endearing way, and they're like hanging out with him, and they're kind of just like, they are exploiting some of his quirks in a way of like, hey, if you flip a coin, he'll call it heads every time, or like he can wiggle his ears when he does this thing, or like whatever, but they're not making fun of him in a malicious way that is shown in the original source material of the book. And I think that added a lot of humanness and dimension to our main characters. But in the movie, they've got him in there doing some of these things, and the kids are kind of like endearing. They're like, oh, we're just like making them feel part of the gang, and we're like hanging out with him and interacting with him instead of ignoring him, and they're like shown being kind to him. I don't know why that difference is there. Take him right out if you're not going to use him in the way that is intended and the way that makes sense. There's a lot of things that they took right out that added to the story, though, I shouldn't say they took it out. They omitted. They didn't include. So one of those things is that the death of Cecilia, the way that she's impaled, there's no blood. There's no horror to it. It's almost like she's just lying down on the fence, angelic and super peaceful. Whereas in the book and in reality, that would not be the scene. And like, they just completely gloss over it. They make it super pretty and just calm. And it's like, yeah, but that contrast isn't there. And that's what we needed, was that high contrast of like this horrific thing that happened and showing the reality of it, rather than like some crazy like, oh, there's no blood anywhere, she's wearing this white dress. I'm just like, oh, and I don't think it's for symbolic purposes. I don't think that's why that choice was made. It's just, again, pulling punches, getting a certain rating, and not having the courage to express things the way that the book had done so, to create high contrast, to create that beauty in those elements. I think it's almost like Sofia Coppola thought this was beautiful, but for the wrong reasons, or at least not the reasons that I found the book to be beautiful, which is those high contrast moments, and that this is reality, and that we don't have wooden characters, and that they are three-dimensional. Anyway, pregnancy scare, completely absent. Lux is shown as we know that she's promiscuous. That part is real, but she ends up having a pregnancy scare, and that whole part is completely not in the movie at all. And I think, again, that adds to that promiscuity, that adds to like, I mean, because there's a hospital visit, that builds some tension, and then we figure out why she was there, and then taking that away, it just felt a little empty. There's like a hand job scene, and like that doesn't happen at all. It's referred to, but again, they don't do it. Like it's again Lux being crazy over the top promiscuous more than any other time, right before she kills herself. And she basically in the book gives this kid hand skis in his pants, like in front of all the other dudes. And it's like, what the hell? And this time it was just like a reference of like, hey, maybe we can go and like, what, she like unclips his belt or something. And then like, yeah, it's a reference, but nothing happens with that. And again, that's just like a thing that I felt was really important in the book. And then yeah, and I already mentioned the other attempt at death wasn't there. It was like, oh, everyone just killed themselves at once, and then we don't see that like that possible reality of like, no, someone screwed up, and then they had to try again, because we had that with Cecilia to begin with, but then we've got to happen with another daughter again, and like everything just is cleaned up, tidied up, and trying to just be more, I don't know what word to use. Again, it's subdued, it's muted, it's just cleaner, and it's not as realistic because of that, and nor is it as beautiful. That's how I feel. Speaking of symbolism, sometimes the symbolism here is really subtle in a nice way, and sometimes it's crazy, over the top, way too blunt and obvious, and that's what makes this film also feel amateurish. I'm going to go through one example, just one of those like really obvious like pieces of symbolism that was just like super amateur. There's a moment they're trying to show the passage of time and also what is happening during that passage of time, that the family unit is deteriorating. They don't care about certain things or keeping up certain types of appearances. They let their newspapers kind of build up on the sidewalk. They don't pick them up. So there's a pile of old newspapers there from just like whatever newspaper person throwing papers. Someone is going through the door, and the shot that we see, it's like on the sidewalk of the newspapers, close up, this bundle of newspapers that's all old, it's a pile of them, not a bundle, a pile, and we see this person have to step over them. And it's like, yeah, we got it. You could have just had a further away shot that just shows them stepping over it, and it just would have, like, it was just so, like, hey, look, I want you to see this thing. And it was like, yeah, we would have got that anyway. Like, we get it. It was just like this really amateur shot that really interrupted and just it interrupted the flow and took me out of the moment, which is not what you want to do. However, good things that happened, I think, some symbolism that was kept there. The tree thing, there's this whole thing with the tree where they're going to cut down this tree at one point because of Dutch elm disease or something akin to that. And it's in the Lisbon family's like front yardish area. It's their tree, and they take objection to this. But tree, family tree, life, living, etc. Symbolism there. So we have shots that are not about the tree, that are just about like people going into the house or coming out of the house, and we usually see the tree and it has a notice on it from the very beginning. That's like a notice that this tree needs to come down. And I thought that was a nice subtle touch, that again, it wasn't like we did this close up right onto the tree, like here you go, here it is. It was just like there. And I was like, yeah, I see that. And then it went from yellow to red at one point, like the notice did. And I was like, that's subtle and that's nice, and I like that, and it helps tell this story, and it fills things out. But anyway, with that tree symbolism, they do talk about the line that Cecilia has written in her diary. The kids, the boys, have the diary now. They have obtained it after her death, and it's funny because they don't talk about this as being significant, but we know that it is. One of the kids says, "Dying trees. How many pages can you write about dying trees?" And that Cecilia is obsessed with that tree, and this is one reason as to why the Lisbon girls don't want them to cut down the tree, or the family doesn't want them to cut down the tree. And she also like has a handprint in it with plaster in one of the knots. Yeah, so I want to go through other things here. And again, I think there were things that were done well here, and that was one of them. So, Cecilia dies, and as the family is entering the house after this, right before it fades and goes black, the sprinklers turn on. And to me, that was like, okay, life goes on. we're moving on now. Like, I felt like that was a really nice touch. Just adding that sprinkler was a choice. It was like a very specific choice that was made, and I really liked that they did that. Also, that's the thing with her death. What they end up doing is that they end up taking the fence out. They like change the fence, they don't change the parenting. And I thought that was a nice nod as well. That is really a deeper part of the book that I enjoy, is just like, they're getting to the fact, like, hey, this is kind of the parents' fault. It's like speculation, and some people have other opinions and whatever. But I think that they definitely add to that. And just like the girls not having, like some people just said like, oh, they just wanted to escape that house. That's the only way they could. And then someone makes a joke about escaping the interior decor because it's horrible, whatever. Anyway, but yeah, they change the fence, they don't change their parenting. They're like, okay, we'll take the fence out, then the girls can't kill themselves on it anymore. And it's just like, no, you need to change. Like, you are not helping the situation. You aren't a good guide for them. Like, you need to change, but they don't. So I thought that was a nice touch too. The references to the virgin thing are interesting too. So we have that shot that happens more than once, I think, of like this card that has a phone number, and it's like, it's the Virgin Mary on it. I think it was a bookmark or something that Cecilia had on her person the first time she tried to kill herself in the bathtub, slitting her wrists. And then also, I think maybe it was in her diary as a bookmark or something. And then it shows up again later. But then also just like silly things that, again, are like, that are put in there out of context. But because we have the whole piece, we see that. And like, someone's blowing a smoke ring, and then one of the boys in the car pokes it and says, "Don't let it die a virgin." And that just, yeah, that's in there too. I think that it's interesting that the parents support the daughters in fighting back against the tree removal, and that makes me ask some questions that I'll leave with you. Some of the motifs that were also missing were the leave collecting and burning as this community thing that family doesn't, the Lisbons aren't doing anymore. And then also and that's a whole thing too, with like the tree symbolism and whatever, and the leaves, and just like they aren't doing that. And I wonder if that's just because they're like, a part of it is just showing that they're withdrawn and they're isolated and they're not participating. But part of it also might be just like, we're leaving things the way they are. And that's part of that standstill, which we're going to get back to here, is part of the problem. They're not evolving. They're not actually moving on, as much as that sprinkler might suggest. Time is moving on, right? And that, I'm sure that was a timed sprinkler. But anyway. And then the insect thing, the swarm of insects, that's not in there either. And I think that was some symbolism that could have been added in there. So here's some things that I really like. Again, this is more about the story than it is about what's in the movie, but the movie is following the story to a degree. So Trip is narrating, and he's talking about Lux. So Trip is one of the boys, but not one of the ones that's like really observing the family. The boys are observing Trip as well, and his relationship with Lux. He's just this football star. Well, maybe he's not a star. He's a guy on the football team who's just like super like pretty boy, gets all the girls, gets high, has a nice car, skips school, whatever. He's not really a bad boy, but he's a little bit. But anyway, and at one point he calls Lux the still point of the turning world. And I think it's his way of just saying, like, obviously she just makes my world stop. She's beautiful, like whatever. And that giving him that sense of maybe calm and peace and whatever. But it's interesting because she is the still point of the turning world. Her and her family don't evolve after Cecilia's death, or they're just so stuck that things deteriorate. And I think that's a nice parallel as well. She's the still point of the turning world. Her whole family is. One thing that the movie did that I don't remember being in the book. Sorry, two things. Well, it's one thing, but it happens twice. And it has to do with Trip and Lux as well. is that they're when Trip basically goes and expresses to Lux his intentions on asking her out and hanging out with her at her family's house, there's like a science movie going on, and it's about hurricanes, and he's like sitting next to her, and I don't, like I said, this might be in the book, but I don't remember it. I remember like that scene in the book, but I don't remember them specifically saying what they were watching. But it talks about like, and this might be corny, but I like it anyway. It talks about like cold and warm air, and high and low pressure coming into contact to create hurricanes. And it was funny because she was being cold to him, and he was coming on, obviously, just like coming on to her, and she was kind of giving him the cold shoulder, but then also the high and low pressure thing. And I think she's under a lot of pressure in her family, and he is so chill, and he is just like, I get high and I relax and I get other people to do my homework for me. I don't really worry about anything, and I've got money and a car, and I just have women whenever I want them. And so he's so low pressure, and she is the opposite of that. And then that hurricane thing that comes into play later when the first time that they kiss, it is such a freaking whirlwind situation. It's short and quick and fast, and more than kissing happens, but like it's so, yeah, it's just aggressive, like a hurricane would be. So I thought that was nice. And then also, and again, it might be corny, it might be a little too much, a little too over the top, was that when he's watching TV with the whole family at their place, they're watching like some animal show, some wildlife show, and they talk about animals and like the hunt and like taking something down. And I was like, that's what Trip is gonna do, and he does. He ends up eventually having sex with her on the football field. I think that's where she loses her virginity, and then he like pieces out and leaves her there. And this is a segue into just me wrapping things up. The absurdity of life, the absurdity of puberty, the absurdity of everything, because he talks about later on when they interview him, and I don't think it makes this super clear in the movie, but he is an alcoholic and he's like in a rehab facility, and they interview him, and he says that most people never taste that kind of love. And he's like, but at least I did once. And he's talking about Lux. This is like decades later on how much he loved her and he was so obsessed with her. Finally, they have sex, and then he completely abandons her in the middle of the night in a football field, doesn't take her home. She gets in horrible trouble because of this, and the whole thing deteriorates after that even more so. And he doesn't talk to her again. He's like, yeah, just something about that. I don't know. I just like didn't like her at that moment. And then, but he was obsessed before and after. But then he finally obtains what he wants, right? And then nope, he's not into it. He doesn't want to deal with her. So with that absurdity of life, also, it's going back to the parenting thing. It's just an absurdity of puberty and high school and everything else is that they being Lux and Trip are named Homecoming King and Queen, and that's really interesting too, because Lux is pretty much absent at that school. All the sisters really are, and always have been. And so it's weird that they would, like Trip is not that way, but they I don't know. Somehow Lux is named Homecoming Queen. And there's this moment where the dad, played by James Woods, because he's a faculty member, he's a teacher there, or was. And at that moment he still is, and he's chaperoning the dance. And he sees that their kids are going to be all right. Like, yeah, my kids are going to do just fine. You know, Lux is homecoming queen, and wow. He's like really proud. And it's like, that is so superficial. It's like the thing of like, let's take out the fence, then the kids won't kill themselves. Like, and it's just like, she's going to be all right because of that? Like, you have no idea what's going on. Like, again, that's so surface, right? And I think that moment was really great, of them showing like, you know, she's gonna be all right, that kid. And I think he thinks that way of all his daughters. He just thinks like things are gonna be okay in general, and life is gonna be fine now. And of course it is not. I think that part of what the story gets at is, again, absurdity. Is absurdity typical of life in general? I think the book obviously gets at this more than the movie. or are we just talking about puberty? That nostalgic feeling, how absurd is that feeling too? Because these kids are trying to, like, as adults now, piece together what really happened, and they still argue about stuff in their adulthood decades after it happened with the Lisbon girls. What was the order of events? They're obsessed with them still, and just like they have interviews with other adults from around that time decades ago, and they're getting all this information, and it's like you can't trust your memory at all. And that somebody once said that nostalgia is useless, and that feeling of nostalgia just doesn't serve any purpose. And it's interesting because I think that's where a lot of the beauty comes out here, but also the absurdity. Wrapping things up. One of the things I was disappointed with that was left out, and I think, and it's towards the end of the book, I think it's the most important line in the book. And this isn't verbatim, this is, I've left a little bit out, but I think it sums things up really well, or at least asks another question. And it's, the torturers pointed to a simple reasoned refusal to accept the world as it was. And it's saying that it says that the girls' suicides, their outlook on life, came down to refusing to accept the world the way that it was. So they pieced out instead. It's obviously very casual and colloquial, and I don't want to make light of suicide and those darker things, but they just decided that they didn't want to accept the way things were. And it wasn't the world, it was their world, which is kind of the same thing. But in that household, with those parents, they couldn't break out of that. So they decided to just not be there anymore. And I think that line was just so important. But despite the fact that there are some lines directly taken out of the book, they left that right out. And I just think it's worse for it. I think that was key, and that also should have found a way to get worked in instead of omitted. I think that this ended up being a review of the book as well, and of that story, because I speak about things that got left out, right? But this is a film adaptation, and I just don't think it did a good job. I think that they omitted the wrong things and kept some things that didn't really make sense for the way that they were used. And I don't think it was just a time thing. I really don't. I feel like some of those things could have been, just changing the shot doesn't take any more or less seconds or minutes out of the film. It just changes the viewpoint to not make it so obvious and distracting. I don't know what else to say. I liked watching the film with the context of the book already in hand. I liked some of the actor choices for the characters. I liked some of that beauty that came through with the visuals and some of the choices that were made there, musically as well. I think that there were some good things done here, but there were too many missteps for this to be great, and it could have been beautiful and lovely and fantastic, and instead it is just mediocre and amateurish. The Virgin Suicides.